There was a surprise news item very recently about a figure, doctor, I suppose, who President Trump was touting, who was skeptical of some of the more, popular common scientific narratives about what's going on with COVID. And some people dug into her past a little bit and found that she had stated that certain gynecological maladies could be traced back to having sex with demons in your dreams. Now, obviously, that's a very unique take. But what was interesting about it was it brought up this subject that the idea, let's just say, of demon sex, which was not really one that people talked about very much, and in this context seemed pretty weird. But what it brought to mind for me is this really interesting Mesopotamian story about these people called the Apkallu, and you'll see where I'm going with this shortly. So the Apkallu are these kind of divine sages prior to this global flood. And basically they're these legendary creatures. They're endowed with all this great wisdom. There's 7 of them altogether, and they're these kind of heroes from before the flood. So there's different things that are said about them. They talk about their great size. They talk about them having some ancestry leading up to these important Mesopotamian kings and scholars, people who are kind of the ruling elite. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is they're described as not... so after the flood, you have these kind of semi-Apkallu. They're of partial human descent. One of them in particular, after the flood, is described as being only 2/3 Apkallu. And so the implication is that these Apkallu are the result of sexual intercourse with human women. So, of course, some of this you'll find in all kinds of mythology, especially when it comes to trying to legitimate a king's right to rule. They'll claim to be a descendant, or they would claim to be a descendant of a god. So the question, so why am I bringing this up? What's the significance of this? Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is because there are these figures in the Old Testament that are pretty weird, kind of confusing, and they're called the Nephilim. So I'm going to start with a passage in Numbers, and I'm going to kind of work my way backwards. Okay, so in Numbers here, the Israelites are trying to sort of take over the land, and they keep running into these Nephilim or Nephilim adjacent figures. So Numbers 13, 28 through 33 says, "Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large, and moreover, we saw the descendants of Anik there." So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land, which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we've gone and spying it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anik are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." So that's Numbers. So basically they sent spies into the land to sort of figure out what's going on here. Can we take these guys? And then if you come back and they say, hey, these guys are enormous, they're descendants of the Nephilim, and they're these sons of Anik. So who is Anik? What's this about? So we don't really necessarily know who Anik is, but we do know that his sons are described as Nephilim, and that they're very tall. In fact, Nephilim probably means giants. but it doesn't really, the text doesn't really tell us much more than that. But we can kind of follow a trail of breadcrumbs by focusing on some keywords like Nephilim, Anik, Anakim, which means the people of Anik. So the first time we read the word Nephilim in Scripture is actually in Genesis 6, verse 1 through 5. Now it came about, I'm quoting here, when men began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So some, I guess some scholars, but basically, some Bible teachers and pastors, and also a handful of church fathers and things, they've argued that sons of God is a code word, so a code phrase for this godly line of Adam and Eve's son Seth, and the daughters of men is a code for this ungodly line of Cain. So the idea is, basically, a nice family is shacking up with, or members of a nice family are shacking up with members of a not so nice family, and that's where we get all these mighty men of renown, whom seem to have something to do with increasing wickedness on the earth and leading to God wanting to destroy most of the earth with a flood, or most of the people on the earth at the very least. So, but here's some problems with this viewpoint. The text never mentions or implies a line of Seth or a line of Cain. It's just not there. It's actually not only not there, it's nowhere. So you can't find that anywhere in the Bible. There's also no reason to think that normal human breeding between families would produce offspring that are of peculiar size. The term sons of God also only refers to angelic beings in the Old Testament. So, for example, Job 1:6 and 2:1. And so if we know that sons of God has this angelic kind of divine being connotation, then daughters of men seems to be obviously contrast. Where you have sons, you have daughters. Where you have man, you have God, you have man. So, and this phrase really, though, it's really only used in this passage, and it's almost certainly meant to be a contrast. So, if the sons of God are angels, then the daughters of men are human beings. This is the plainest and most obvious reading of the passage. So I think it's the one that we ought to go with. In other words, Genesis 6 seems to be saying that Nephilim were a large, when I say large, I mean tall, line of people that emerged when angels took on human forms and had sex with human women. So apart from Genesis 6, we read about the Nephilim in these sort of wandering and conquest narratives when Israel's sort of coming into the land. In Numbers 13, we read that they scared off the Israelites from coming in because of their great size. In Deuteronomy 2:20 through 21, we read that another group of giants called the Rephaim had lived in Ammon, but had been killed by the Ammonites with the blessing of God. So in Deuteronomy 3, we read the conquest of the land beyond the Jordan seems to have been focused on destroying the Nephilim. Verse 11 tells us, For only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. Behold, his bedstead was an iron bedstead. It is in Rabbah of the sons of Ammon. Its length was 9 cubits, and its width 4 cubits by ordinary cubit. So big bed. When we get to Joshua, we read in chapter 11 that Joshua cut off the Anakim from the hill country of Judah and Israel, utterly destroying their cities. Verse 22 reads, There were no Anakim left in the land of the sons of Israel, only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod some remained. It seems to suggest that at least one of the motivations for the more violent parts of the conquest were to wipe out the Nephilim. You might have noticed that Joshua reads that one of the few places that still had Nephilim was a city of Gath. If you've read your Old Testament, you might think Gath. Where have I heard that? Oh, I know where I've heard Gath. 1 Samuel 17:4. Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits in a span. Old Testament scholar Dr. Michael Heiser argues in his book The Unseen Realm that the Nephilim, instead of owing their existence directly to God, were produced by other divine beings who were hostile to God. The Nephilim, quote, did not belong to Yahweh, this is the biblical name for God, and he therefore had no interest in claiming them. Coexistence was not possible with the spawn of other gods, and that ridding the land of these bloodlines was the motivation, unquote, for holy war. Now, this understanding of the sons of God being angels and not the line of Seth is supported by Jewish teaching between the Testaments, between the Old and New Testaments. Early church consensus pretty much agrees on it up until St. Augustine in the 4th century, and even the New Testament itself. Jude 5-7. Now I want to remind you, although you know everything once and for all, that Jesus, being saved, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, the second time destroyed those who did not believe, and the angels who did not keep their own domain, but deserted their proper dwelling place, he has kept in eternal bonds under deep gloom for the judgment of the great day. As Sodom and Gomorrah and the towns around them indulged in sexual morality and pursued unnatural desire in the same way as these, are exhibited as an example by undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. So, the angels left their, did not keep their own domain, they deserted their proper dwelling place, and in the same way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the towns around them indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire. So, the angels who deserted their domain are charged with sexual immorality and compared to the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. Jude also quotes the Book of Enoch in this section. The Book of Enoch is a book written between the Testaments also that very strongly holds to this idea of angels coming down and having sex with women. I think that's also significant. So if Jude is quoting Enoch while he's talking about angels having sex, engaging in sexual immorality, it's pretty obvious what he's got in mind. So a takeaway here, I think, is that the Bible's written from a supernatural worldview, and modern people have often sought to diminish that worldview. We don't like too much supernatural. I think we're constantly bargaining with God to get the supernatural beings down, you know? So like, you know, angels and demons, can we get rid of that? And some people even said, Trinity, I mean, that feels like 3 gods. Maybe we can just, you know, get that down to sort of one, you know, disinterested Unitarian God. So we're constantly trying to diminish this supernatural worldview while still wanting to kind of hold on to the Bible. So passages like these, they tend to get reinterpreted to make them fit into our own perspective, something that feels more comfortable for kind of a Western rationalistic mindset, where the supernatural we want to keep as small as possible. But I think even if you end up concluding like some kind of a spiritual reading here, so let's say that's not literal history, right? So maybe there is some spiritual meaning. Maybe it's a polemic. Maybe what's going on is that this notion of these sort of pagan divine kings who have this divine authority to rule, maybe that's what's being attacked, and maybe you don't need to interpret all this literally. That's possible, sure, that's possible. But I think if you at the very least have to come to terms with what the text says. The message is important because it has to do with God reclaiming his lost children and judging the gods of the nations. It also points forward to how Jesus fixes what fallen humans and angels have messed up, where angels had sex with women to create a race of divine hybrids that corrupted the world and led to God destroying it with a flood. God takes on human flesh, and he joins himself to humanity to heal our crookedness and bring us back into a relationship with God. So it's kind of a reverse, Nephilim situation, right? So if we have to come to terms with the fact that the Bible says that, does that mean that we should give credence to the idea that if somebody has, for example, a yeast infection, that is the result of them having dreams where they are having sex with demons? I would say no. So I think there is, a notion of the demonic having influence and even influence on natural things, you know. So where there are plenty of places where Jesus heals people of kind of natural ailments, and there's no discussion of demonic possession or anything like that. There are also places where there's a healing and something demonic is blamed, when a natural explanation is likely. I think what we would want to say is that there is a supernatural realm, where things are happening and going on, and it influences the natural realm. Does that mean that if you have a yeast infection, it's because an angel had sex with you? I would say probably not. I think I'd want to see some pretty strong evidence that that's the case. But I think even if you want to say that, you know, illness and sickness and death and pain have a spiritual dimension, that there are these spiritual forces that are ultimately behind those terrible things, I think that's perfectly valid. I think that's very biblical. But that doesn't mean that, you know, you shouldn't take a doctor prescribed medication, or that you shouldn't try to trace back a natural cause either, right? You know, so if we want to say, you know, the reason people die is because sin has entered the world, and you know, the devil has the power of death. Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely. Does that mean that instead of giving people life-saving surgeries, you should rebuke the devil? Well, you can do both, sure, but I mean, I would go with the life-saving surgery at the very least, right? I mean, deal with the natural issue that's going on, even if you believe there's a supernatural force behind it. So anyway, I hope you all stay safe. Be careful not to have any dream sex with demons, and take your doctor prescribed medication. Thank you.